Hello, and welcome to my biology class, and thank you for exploring life with me. And in this chapter, we discuss the chemical basis of life. So this beautiful coral reef illustrates the magnificent way in which living organisms put atoms of different elements together to form beautiful, beautiful structures and that interact with one another in a healthy environment. However, the activities of man releasing different chemicals to pollute air environment can be harmful to such beautiful habitats as the one with the aquatic habitat in which the coral reefs are. And understanding the problem and finding the solution to their problems lies in chemistry, because living organisms really are like chemical machines because we are built from elements. So for instance, when carbon dioxide is released from burning fossil fuels or burning forests, it is dissolved in water, and the water flows into the large water bodies on Earth, such as the one in which the coral reefs are located, making the environment acidic, making it difficult for life to be supported, established, and sustained in those environments. So life's chemistry is also tied to water. Scientists believe that life first evolved in water, and most organisms require water, and we have, in humans, 70% of our composition is water. And water enables our blood to circulate and carry nutrients to different parts of the body. Our brains are protected by the cerebrospinal fluid, which is water with salts, almost with the same consistency as seawater. So life is very important. Water is very important for life. And so when scientists are looking for evidence of life on other planets, we are looking for water first. So the big idea of the chapter is to discuss the elements, atoms, and compounds. They are the building blocks of life. We are chemical machines as other living organisms are. We are made of the same elements that are found in the stars, that are found in the rocks, that are found in the fish, and so on and so forth. But these compounds, atoms, and elements are put together in different ways to create different functions, different appearances, different beautiful relations. The way in which the atoms of elements combine together is by the formation of chemical bonds. So we're going to look at the different types of chemical bonds that form between atoms to create this vast array of compounds that are so essential to life. Then we look at water's life-supporting properties. Like water is very, very essential for life. And we want to explore those properties that make it so important for life. Elements, atoms, and compounds. So organisms are composed of elements. Usually the elements combine into compounds. For example, even water that we mentioned, we have atoms of hydrogen combines with oxygen in the ratio of 2 atoms of oxygen to 1 of water, to 1 of oxygen, to form water. So matter is defined as anything that has mass and occupies space. And living organisms are composed of matter. The matter is any substance that has mass and occupies space. Matter is composed of chemical elements. So there are about 25 elements that are essential for human life. There are about 17 elements that are important for plant life. So there's a slight variation in the requirements for the lives for plants to survive than there are for humans. And so 4 elements of those 25 elements that are required for human life, there are only 4 elements that make up 96% of these 25 by weight. They make up 96% of the weight. And these I try to remember using CHON, C-H-O-N, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. They make up 96% of the weight of most living organisms. When 2 or more different elements combine in fixed ratio, we call that product a compound. So a compound is a substance consisting of 2 or more different elements in a fixed ratio. So an example of a compound is sodium chloride, 1 ratio of 1 sodium to 1 chlorine, and they form NaCl, sodium chloride. In water, 2 atoms of hydrogen to 1 of oxygen combine to form H2O. That's another compound. So this is illustrating how the salt, the common table salt sodium chloride, is formed. Sodium, which is solid, and notice that the handler is working in a glove box because sodium is highly reactive and is corrosive to the skin, so you cannot go touching it with your bare chlorine, on the other hand, is gas and it's poisonous. You don't want to breathe it in. So you see this round bottomed flask is kind of colored slightly yellow because it's filled with chlorine gas. When these two react together, they form a compound. The compound sodium chloride, which is crystalline white salt, looks nothing like chlorine and nothing like sodium. More importantly, unlike this unsafe, unedible composition, sodium chloride is desirable, tasty, and nice. Can be addictive. So, so your checkpoint question, don't forget that. For chapter 2, make a list of your answers to your checkpoint questions and email to me. The checkpoint question 1 for this chapter is explain how table salt illustrates the themes of emergent properties. So this slide illustrates the elements that are that constitute the human body. Oxygen alone makes up 65%. So it's there, it's a member of the proteins in your body, is a member of that 70% water. A large chunk of that is oxygen. It is there in the proteins. It's there in all of the different important. And then more importantly, we are breathing in, our lungs are filled also with oxygen. So carbon, 18%, 18.5, hydrogen 9.5, nitrogen 0.5, CHON. Those 4 make up 96% of our composition. Phosphorus, very important. Calcium, very important. Composition of our bones, our teeth. Phosphorus is present in the DNA, the nucleotide molecules in the body. Potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium, all of those are important. In addition, we have the so-called trace elements. Trace elements together make up 0.01% of our bodies by weight, but that doesn't make them less important, and we will see some of the importance of trace elements as we in the next few slides as we discuss. So trace elements started to be added to our food as additives and also to our drinking water as additives, because scientists came to realize the importance of these elements. They are, even though they are required in trace amounts, minute quantities, they are important. Trace elements are required to prevent disease. For example, fluoride is added to our municipal water and to your toothpaste, to your dental products, to help you reduce tooth decay. Chemicals are added to food to preserve it. Some chemicals are added to make it more nutritious or simply to make it look better. But trace elements are substances that are required in very, very small but important amounts in the body. So an example of a trace element that's important is iron. If we have iron deficiency, we become anemic because our bodies cannot transport oxygen as effectively as it should. We become weak and tired. Iodine is another supplement that's added to our table salt, because iodine is important composition of our thyroid hormones, and when it's not there, our bodies is not able to make these hormones that are very important to maintaining homeostasis in life. And then when there's a lack of iodine, the body might be fooled into thinking that the glands are not working and they begin to enlarge. So lack of iodine, for instance, will cause the thyroid glands to enlarge, causing goiter in the individual in areas where the diet lacks iodine. But if iodine is added to salt water, that lack is not existent, and so the person's diet is more balanced, their health is balanced. So checkpoint question here is: a serving of cereal fortified to provide 100% of the recommended daily intake contains 18 milligrams of iron. The recommended tolerable upper intake level is 45 milligrams. How many bowls of cereal can you eat before you exceed that level? Again, complete this checkpoint question and email to me. So this woman suffers from goiter, which is typical, sometimes used to be called the Yorkshire neck, which is one of the early areas where young women will develop this rounded neck swelling as the thyroid gland swell due to lack of iodine. When there is no iodine, the thyroid is trying to make its hormones, but it cannot make it. So it thinks, okay, I need to make more cells to be able to make the hormones. But the fact is, it's not the amount of cells that you have to have the material, the chemical element to build those hormones. And so without the iodine, you have those hyperthyroidism. These are some sources of iron. I've told you that without iron, people become anemic. Iron is very, very important. If there's deficiency of iron in a pregnant woman, the child might have spina bifida, different conditions that would arise. So some sources of iron, raisins, green leafy vegetable, green lentils, all of these different legumes and eggs, beef, and liver, onions, and those are good sources for you of iron. Toothpaste, that's your good source of fluoride to prevent tooth decay. Given in the right amount, it will prevent tooth decay. Excess amount can cause tooth discoloration, however. So now let's take a look at the structure of atoms. So atoms have 3 subatomic particles. So what is an atom? Each element distinguished from one another by elements are distinguished from one another by the kinds of atom that they possess. So each element has its own unique kind of atom. So the atom of hydrogen is different than the atom of oxygen, different than the atom of sodium, different than the atom of calcium, and so on and so forth. An atom is the smallest unit of matter that still retains all the properties of an element. So the smallest unit that is still an element behaves in every way as that element is the atom. Remember, the atom of sodium is different than the atom of calcium, different than the atom of potassium, and so on and so forth. There are 3 subatomic particles that are relevant to our discussion. There are numerous subatomic particles that physicists have identified and described, but for our purposes, we are going to be discussing the 3 relevant subatomic particles. These are neutrons, protons, and electrons. So protons, neutrons, and electrons. Those are the 3 subatomic particles. I'm sorry. So neutrons and protons are packed inside the atom's nucleus. Remember, the nucleus of the atom is not the same as the nucleus of a cell that we're going to discuss later. They are different. So the electrons, they revolve around the nucleus. The number of protons is also called the atomic number, because remember I told you that the atom of a particular element is unique to that element. That uniqueness is made possible by the unique number of protons in an element. And the number of protons in an element is called its atom number. So the atomic number is equal to the number of protons, and it gives the identity to the atom and consequently to the element. Because of that, it is called the number of that atom, the atomic number, because that's a defining number for that atom. So the atom also has mass, and the mass of an atom is the sum of the number of protons and neutrons. So because the electron have negligible mass. So the atomic mass is approximately equal to its mass number. And so let's go back. Let's take a look at the 3 subatomic particles. Neutrons, as the name suggests, are neutral. They don't have electrical charge. Protons, O positive, they have a positive charge, and electrons are negatively charged. So the neutrons and protons reside in the nucleus of the atom, and because the neutrons are neutral and the protons are positive, there's a net positive charge on the nucleus of an atom. That positive charge on the nucleus of the atom pulls for the negative charge on electrons, and that force holds the electrons in orbit around the nucleus of the atom. The proton and the neutrons, the proton has mass, the neutron has mass. Their mass is approximately equal. The mass of an electron is 1 divided by 1800, the mass of neutron or proton. So their mass, so the mass of the electron is relatively negligible. Imagine that you want to take the weight and you put one banana and a piece of feather, in which one banana is a neutron, the other banana is a proton, and then you bring a feather and you put them on a weighing scale, and the scale doesn't move, the pen doesn't move forward because the mass of the feather is negligible. So in this case, the bananas are analogous to neutron and proton, the 2 bananas, and the feather is analogous to the electron. So when it comes to determining the mass number of an atom, the mass of the electron is negligible, it's so small. And so the atomic mass or the mass number is the sum of the number of protons plus neutrons in the nucleus. So the atomic mass is also approximately equal to the mass number. Sometimes the same atom would have varying number of neutrons, and we have the result is an isotope. So isotopes of an element have the same number of protons, the same atomic number, but different number of neutrons. For example, carbon-12 has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Carbon-13, on the other hand, has 6 protons and 7 neutrons. Carbon-14 has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. So isotopes have the same number of protons, but they vary. They have different number of neutrons. Checkpoint question. Remember to email your listed checkpoint questions for this chapter. A nitrogen atom has 7 protons, and its most common isotope has 7 neutrons. A radioactive isotope of nitrogen has 9 neutrons. What is the atomic number and mass number of the radioactive nitrogen? So this slide is illustrating an atom. So the core of the atom is occupied by these gray neutrons and pink protons. Remember, the protons carry positive charge. The electrons revolve around the nucleus. The electrons are held in place like a magnet, the north and south poles of the magnet. The positive protons pull for the negative electrons. These drawings are not accurate illustration in terms of size and distance between the protons and electrons. The second shows the electron cloud merely to illustrate that if the electrons are not stationary, so the electrons are constantly moving, and as they move fast enough, they form a cloud around the nucleus. And so you see, like I'm spinning this, you see what the the cloud of electron is like. So that's how the electrons revolve around the nucleus of the atom. So we have 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. This is in helium. This is a helium, 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. These are isotopes of carbon. Remember, an isotope has the same number of protons, but they have a different number of neutrons. So this carbon-12, that's a normal common carbon. Carbon-13, also stable, found in nature, but not a very, very small percentage. And carbon-14 is a radioactive version. So the radioactive compounds are relatively unstable. They undergo radioactive decay. And so let's look at carbon-12. Carbon-12 has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. So its mass number, the number of protons plus neutrons, is 12. And so it's called carbon-12. Carbon-14, on the other hand, has 6 protons, 7 neutrons, and 6 electrons. Mass number 6 plus 7, 13. So it's carbon-13. Carbon-14 has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. Mass number is 14, and so it's called carbon-14. So, so what is the importance of discussing isotopes, especially radioactive isotopes? Because they can help us, they can harm us, they're around us. We need to be aware of them, their role in our lives. So the radioactive isotopes in medicine, in laboratories, scientists use them as useful tracers for monitoring the fate of atoms in living organisms. As a result of the use of radioactive isotopes, we've been able to follow the steps that are involved in the process of cellular respiration, in the process of photosynthesis in living organisms, and so many other biochemical pathways have been elucidated in living organisms using radioactive isotopes. Now, radioactive isotopes, they emit radiation that can be detected by imaging instruments. So when you go for a PET scan and imaging in medical facilities, then we are taking advantage of our knowledge of radioactive isotopes and actually using radioactive isotopes in this process. However, there are dangers associated with using radioactive substances. So, so in one of the current events, I will email it to you, would ask you to complete assignments, find news, recent news on radioactive dangers of radioactive substances. Your checkpoint questions: why are radioactive isotopes useful as tracers in research on the chemistry of life? Remember to email your listed checkpoint questions for this chapter to me. So this in hospitals, hospitals use positron emission topography to map out the brain of individuals in order to diagnose certain diseases. And so you have the activity in the parts of the body can be highlighted as the radioactivity concentrates in those extremely bioactive parts of the body. And so this as a PET scan showing a healthy brain section and Alzheimer's patient, you can see all of these areas of activity showing where the radioactive level is attached to the Alzheimer patients' brains. And so hopefully, eventually, these areas can be identified and through some technology be treated. And so, okay. Chemical bonds. Okay. So chemical bonds, like I told you, is a way in which the atoms of different elements, or sometimes atoms of the same elements, combine. So the distribution of electrons in an atom determines its chemical properties. So in an atom, the electrons can be located at different shells, and each shell is at a characteristic distance from the nucleus. And each shell has a characteristic number of electrons that it can hold until it is full. So an atom whose outer electron shell is not full tends to interact with other atoms either by sharing electrons, by gaining electrons, or losing electrons in order to make sure that its outermost shell is full. The result is the formation of attraction between these atoms that is called chemical bonds. So your checkpoint question, looking at electron distribution diagrams for hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon, how many covalent bonds can each form? What is a covalent bond? So a covalent bond is a kind of bond that is formed when atoms share electrons. Here is your carbon atom. It has 6 protons, 6 neutrons. 6 protons will pull for 6 electrons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons. Notice that at the first shell level, there's only 2 electrons, because that's the maximum number of electrons that can be held at this level. Any extra electron comes in, they are pushed, boom, to the second level. And there are specific locations at the energy shell levels also where the electrons can be found. There is only this pair here, but there can be a pair here, a pair here, a pair here, and a pair here. Now, these electrons will fill one orbital first before they start pairing. So this is carbon. This is the outermost shell, is also called the valence shell. So carbon has 4 electrons in its outermost shell, which makes it very, very versatile to living organisms, because it can form a covalent bond here, 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 and here in 4 places. So it can, that's why it forms the backbone of most of the organic compounds, many of the compounds that form the bodies of living organisms. The elements that have been identified are arranged into the periodic table of elements according to the number of shells. So this is the first shell. We have hydrogen and helium. So hydrogen has this 1 valence electron, but helium is a noble gas having the 2 electrons out here. The second shell, we have lithium, beryllium, and you can look at the full periodic table of elements if you are interested. But notice the 4 elements that make up 96% of the human body. They are in the hydrogen here, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen are located here. And in the third shell, you have 1, 2, 3 shells in there. Covalent bonds can join atoms into molecules through electron sharing. So I told you, looking at carbon, it's able to covalently bond in 4 different locations with other atoms. If a covalent bond is formed in which the 2 atoms share electrons equally, then the covalent bond is defined as a non-polar covalent bond. However, if one of the atoms is more electronegative and pulls the shared electrons closer to it at any given time, then the bond, the covalent bond that is formed, is defined as a polar covalent bond. Example of non-polar covalent bond is when carbon binds to hydrogen in using each of its 4 outermost electrons, as in methane. An example of a polar covalent bond is in the water molecule. The electrons are pulled closer to the oxygen atom with 8 protons and away from the hydrogen with just 1 proton. So your checkpoint question, and you should email me the completed list of checkpoint questions, is polarity refers to separation of charge. Explain why the bonds in a water molecule are polar covalent bonds. So let's look at the formation of a covalent bond. So there's a proton. Remember the electron cloud that I illustrated using this thread. You see that cloud of electron revolving around the nucleus of the atom. So as the 2 atoms approach, the electrons of each is also attracted to the proton in the other nucleus, and you have this dumbbell-shaped formation and the 2 electrons. And you have hydrogen and hydrogen, and each hydrogen is fooled into thinking that it has 2 electrons out there, and they are more stable. So hydrogen gas exists as H2 instead of as just HH. So these are 4 molecules, each illustrating covalent bond. So hydrogen and hydrogen, they have this shared electron that revolves around their nucleus and they assume stability. In oxygen, they're sharing a pair of electrons. When atoms share a pair of electrons, then we have a double bond. So this is a double bond. There's a single bond between hydrogen and hydrogen. In methane gas, there is a single bond in 4 places. So this is a polar covalent bond. This is polar because there's even equal sharing. In water, it's different because you have this huge proton of oxygen pulling the electrons that it shares with hydrogen closer at any given time. So this is a polar covalent bond, and these are non-polar covalent bonds. Because the electrons are pulled closer to the oxygen nucleus, there's a partial negative charge on the oxygen and a partial positive charge on the hydrogen atoms. So remember non-polar covalent bond and polar covalent bonds. Now let's watch that animation. Ionic bonds are different from covalent bonds because they involve the gain or loss of electrons. So ionic bonds are attractions between ions of opposite charge. So what is an ion? An ion is an atom or molecule with an electrical charge that has resulted from the gain or loss of an electron. Two ions with opposite charges attract each other. So when the attraction holds the ion together, then it is called an ionic bond. In general, salt is a synonym for an ionic compound. So when you say sodium chloride, calcium carbonate, all of these salts are formed from ionic bond. So explain what holds together the ions in a crystal of table salt. Again, email your checkpoint question list for today when you are done. So this is sodium. It has 11 electrons, 2 at the lowest shell, 8 at the second shell, and 1 valence electron. Ideally, it would be happy with 8 electrons, but it only has 1. Chlorine with 17 electrons, 2 at the lowest level, 8 at the second level, has 7 at the third level. And ideally we'll be happy with 8 here. It can hold more, but it will be stable with 8. So during interactions with sodium, sodium gives its one electron, which is easier to do than to try to gain 7. And chlorine gains 1, and the result is sodium chloride. Because sodium already gave an electron, there is a proton that is not neutralized, the nucleus of sodium. And for chlorine, there's an extra electron that does not have a proton that is neutralizing it. So the whole ion carries a positive charge for sodium, and the ion carries a negative charge in the case of chlorine. So an atom or molecule that has electrical charge is called an ion. So this is the sodium. The charges causes the ions to behave and arrange in a manner guided by the rule on like charges attract. The negative charge on the chlorine attracts the positive charge on the sodium, and they crystallize. And so the name ionic bond is synonymous with salt and crystallization. So this is going to show you the animation again. So then we look at hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds are weak bonds. They are important in the chemistry of life. If we have to rank the 3 types of bonds that we have discussed in terms of strength, the covalent bond will be stronger. So hydrogen bonds are weak bonds, but they are very, very important in the chemistry of life. Very, very important. It's hydrogen bonds in water molecule that holds the water molecules together. Hydrogen bonds is possible in water because they are polar. These type of bonds are called hydrogen bonds because they often involve, where they occur, they often involve hydrogen ions. So it won't involve hydrogen. Don't forget the checkpoint question. So let's use this slide to illustrate hydrogen bond. Notice this is one water molecule, oxygen, hydrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, hydrogen. And in a glass of water, you have several hydrogen molecules that are there, with the oxygen negatively charged and the hydrogen positively charged. Partial charges, not full, but partial charges as a result of the shared electrons being pulled closer to oxygen. As a result of the electronegativity of oxygen, the electrons shared between oxygen and hydrogen at any given time are closer to the oxygen nucleus, exerting a partial negative charge on the oxygen and a partial positive charge on the hydrogen. As a result, when several molecules are brought together of water, the partial positive charge on hydrogen is attracted to the partial negative charge of hydrogen because they are partial incomplete charges. A bond is formed, but it's relatively weak bond and is represented by broken lines. And so each water molecule is able to hydrogen bond to 4 other molecules, and this also can have 4 other molecules around it, and that chain goes on, keeping your water molecule fluid and together, bonded by hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds are not stationary. They keep bonding and breaking in this kind of flirtatious behavior of the water molecules with one another or with other other polar substances. So this is animation showing the electronegativity of oxygen, pulling the electrons that is sharing with hydrogen closer to itself. Resulting in a partial negative charge on this side and a partial positive charge on the side of hydrogen. And these partial charges attract the partial charge on opposite and partial charge on the other water molecules, and they build together. Now let's look at chemical reactions. Chemical reactions can make or break chemical bonds. This dance of making and breaking of bonds is always taking place inside living organisms. So the formation of water from hydrogen and water and oxygen is an example of chemical reaction that takes place. So chemical reaction is always taking place in living organisms. And as a rule, reactants yield products. Reactants yield products. So that in some cases, chemical bonds are broken and chemical bonds are formed again, and we have reactants, the ones that are playing a role in that reaction, yield products. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed, so chemical reactions do not create and they do not destroy matter. They merely rearrange it in various ways. So, for example, the plants out there, they take up carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil, and inside the green leaves of plants, they unite them to form glucose. The glucose is stored as food in different plants in various ways, and we go on and we eat those, and then the glucose comes in our bodies, and we inhale and breathe in oxygen and use that to make energy, and as a result, we also release carbon dioxide and water that comes out of us as sweat or coming out as we speak, and carbon dioxide that we breathe out of our nostrils. So those are examples. This reaction, these reactants yield products. So checkpoint question, remember, fill in the blanks with the correct numbers in the chemical process. So this is a water reaction. These are the reactants. 2H2, so hydrogen gas plus O2. And the reaction goes on to give 2 molecules of H2O. That's a product of those reactions. So reactants yield products. Now let's look at the life supporting properties. Water's life supporting properties. So water, the molecule of life. So water, the hydrogen bonds that bond different water molecules together it makes the water molecules cohesive. So if you put 2 droplets of water near one another on your kitchen counter on a glass plate, you will see very soon that they will merge together. This illustrates the cohesion of water. So tendency of water molecules to stick together is cohesion. Tendency of molecules of the same kind to stick together is cohesion. And the tendency of 2 kinds of molecules to stick together is adhesion. Water is both cohesive and adhesive. So water molecule can stick to one another. It can also stick to other surfaces. So when you place straw inside your drink and you're trying to drink, your nutrient is dissolved in that water. Because of cohesion forces, the water molecules are together. Because of adhesion, they stick to the lining of the straw. And when you pull up, they can flow and come into your mouth. Cohesion is related to surface tension as well. And surface tension is measure of how difficult it is to break the surface of water. So you can take a piece of thread and gently lay it on top of your water in a glass of water. It will not sink because of the surface tension of the water holds it, holds that lid. And so again, remember your checkpoint question. After a hard workout, you may notice bits of sweat on your face. Can you explain what holds the sweat in droplet form on your face? So this water treader is able to stand on the water. See, it's almost as if the water is elastic. It's not breaking because of the surface tension. The surface tension is possible because the water molecules coalesce, giving themselves some strength, and so it's not breaking. And so if you take your knife and you go down, or you put your spoon through the middle of water, they come right back together, and so you don't see you can break it. So these properties of water is very, very important in living organisms. For example, in plants have roots, and the roots bring water all the way to the highest leaves because of the forces of cohesion and adhesion. So adhesion, the water have xylem vessels that carry water upwards. And because water can adhere to these surfaces and coalesce with one another, they feel this. Even though the water force of gravity is pulling downwards in the opposite direction, it does not stop the water going up because they are going up by cohesion and adhesion, and they are going to every part. When they get to the leaves of plants, there are stomata openings through which some of the water evaporates. But the water is always replenished. Without replenishment, the evaporation can cause water to dry out. That's why if you have a house plant, if you don't water them, they will dry. So forces of cohesion and adhesion to the surfaces help the water to be able to move upwards against the force of gravity because they can adhere to these thin surfaces, and the water molecules are carried up to the leaves. Okay. So water is important to life again because the hydrogen bonds in water help to moderate temperature changes. So in order to break the hydrogen bonds between water molecules, heat has to be applied. And that's one difference. Like water is liquid, alcohol is also liquid, but you can't be, if you apply heat to alcohol, they can't flame just like that. But because water molecules have hydrogen bonds, joining them together, that requires a lot of heat to break those bonds. As a result, water helps to regulate the body temperature inside the bodies of living organisms and in the environments in which they live. Because heat is absorbed when hydrogen bond is broken, this helps to keep temperatures relatively steady. So the water molecules are heated, the more energetic water molecules evaporate, and the surface cools down because all of that energy is used to power evaporation. And so evaporation causes cooling. And so when you and I are doing exercise and we pass fire, the water comes to the surface of our body. As it evaporates, it cools us down. So that's evaporative cooling. So checkpoint question, explain the popular adage, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. So this athlete being interviewed, I think after a hockey game, you can see all of this steam coming out. So evaporation from the surface, helping to remove some of the heat. So it's kind of easier to see in the cold climate, this evaporative cooling. So water supports life. One of its properties is that water can exist in 3 states of matter They can exist as gas, liquid, or solid. In the gaseous form, when you are boiling water, you can see the steam boiling and escaping as the hydrogen bonds are broken, and they can fly off your pot or your boiling kettle. As liquid, we drink water regularly, and as solid in ice. So in the solid form, water is less dense than liquid, which is very, very important in the very, very cold regions, in the Arctic regions of the Earth, because when water freezes, it is less dense, and so the ice can float on top of the water, preserving marine and aquatic life under it. And explain how freezing water can crack boulders. So this is a polar bear, and this is ice, because the solid water is less dense, is floating above the liquid water, and this guy can enjoy its environment. It's still able to swim in here if it falls into, but other smaller organisms are protected from the cold and kept warm by this ice blanket that's on top of the surface of the water. So this is ice. You can see that the molecules are further apart. So in a given volume area, there are less water molecules than there are in the liquid. And so this is less dense than here. In liquid water, the hydrogen bonds are constantly breaking and reforming, breaking and reforming, and breaking and reforming. Water is a solvent of life. So water can dissolve so many more compounds. So a solution in a liquid, it consists of a uniform mixture of two or more substances. And the solution is made of solvent plus solute. Water is a versatile solute that can dissolve so many substances. So whether the substance is polar or charged, they can dissolve in water, forming an aqueous solution. So, and that's how we can have suspensions in water, such as the blood is carried. But in addition, there's salt and different things that are dissolved in the water, so that is transported throughout our body. So water is a universal solvent, a solvent of life. So this is showing you the water is able to dissolve this sodium chloride because of its negative chloride, of its positive hydrogen attracted to the chloride, and its negatively charged oxygen attracted to the sodium. So from the outside working inwards, they surround the water molecules surrounds the chloride and sodium ions, and so you see the salt melt away and it dissolves in the water. The chemistry of life is sensitive to acid and basic conditions. So we use the pH scale to describe how acidic or basic a solution is. So the lower the pH, the more acidic. The higher the pH, the more alkaline. The pH scale goes from 0 to 14, with a pH of 7 being neutral, and up to 7 is acidic, above 7 to 14 is alkaline or basic. So in living cells, a buffer helps to minimize changes in the pH, so that the pH in the different parts of the body is regulated by the use of buffers. So your checkpoint question, remember to email the answers. Compared to a basic solution at pH 9, the same volume of an acidic solution at pH 4 has how many times? So more of H plus. So 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 the pH scale is logarithmic. So calculate that and send it. So these are examples of everyday household materials and their pH. Battery, lemon juice, tomato juice, all of these guys, and the acid. Your pure water is about 7 pH of, and these are the alkaline pHs. So citric acidic solution, water neutral, bleach basic solution. So scientists, because of the atmospheric increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide, scientists have been studied the effects of carbon dioxide on the coral reef ecosystems. So why carbon dioxide? Because it is the main product of fossil fuel combustion, and its amount is increasing in the atmosphere, and it's been linked to global climate change. So about 25% of the carbon dioxide that's human generated, they end up in the vast oceans, causing ocean acidification. What is ocean acidification? It's lowering of the pH in the ocean. So, and as the sea water acidifies, the extra hydrogen ions that is released, they will combine with carbonate ions to form bicarbonate ions. So the carbonate ions is no longer available for the corals. So it's not available to corals and other seashell animals, depleting them of the resources that they need to build their bodies. So in a controlled experiment, scientists have looked at the effects of decreasing carbon ion concentration on the rate of calcium deposit on the reefs. And they found that the lower the concentration of carbonate ions, the lower the rate of calcification and the slower the growth of the coral animals. So there's a direct correlation. So you have this increasing and you have the calcification rate will be up, decreasing, and the calcification rate will be down. So this is rising bubbles, lower the pH. Rising bubbles lower the pH of the water. Sorry, I'm sorry. So, like I mentioned, based on the importance of water to life, extraterrestrial life search begins with the search for water. So the emergent properties of water support life on Earth and may contribute to potential for life that to have evolved in other planets. So again, complete your checkpoint question. So you should be able to describe the importance of chemical elements to living organisms, explain the formation of compounds. You should be able to describe the structure of an atom, distinguish between ionic, hydrogen, and covalent bonds, define chemical reaction, and explain how it changes the composition of matter. You should be able to list the life-supporting properties of water, explain the pH scale and the formation of acid and base solutions, and explain how rising CO2 levels affect coral reefs. Thank you, and best to you as you study.